Black girl was mocked by her adopted white family until a millionaire rescued her after hearing her story during her college graduation party. Destiny Williams had perfected the art of being invisible, serving champagne to her adoptive family's wealthy guests while enduring their casual cruelty with practiced silence. For 16 years, she'd been the Williams family's charitable showcase, the grateful black foster child who should never forget how lucky she was to have a roof over her head. But when a shattered glass cuts deep into her palm at her adoptive brother's graduation party, everything changes. Vincent Cross, a self-made millionaire who recognizes the pain of never belonging, steps in to help. One emergency room visit leads to an all-night conversation that exposes buried truths, shared wounds, and an unexpected connection that threatens to cost them both everything they've worked to build, or give them everything they never dared to dream possible. Before I continue with this story, please let me know in the comment section where you are watching from, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more beautiful stories. The rejection letter felt heavier than paper had any right to feel, but Destiny Williams had grown accustomed to carrying weights that shouldn't exist. She folded the Stanford rejection carefully, sliding it beneath her psychology textbooks where it joined 3 others, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, each one a door slammed shut with the same polite brutality. Another participation trophy? Her adoptive brother Jake's voice cut through the kitchen like glass. At 19, he possessed the casual cruelty that came with never having to question his place in the world. Mom, Destiny's collecting rejection letters again. Patricia Williams looked up from her laptop, her manicured fingers pausing over the keyboard. The kitchen gleamed around them, marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, fresh flowers that cost more than most families spent on groceries. Everything perfect, everything white, everything except Destiny. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, Patricia said, her voice carrying that particular tone Destiny knew well. Disappointment wrapped in maternal concern, sharp enough to draw blood while maintaining plausible deniability. Maybe she should have applied to more realistic schools, Richard Williams added from behind his Wall Street Journal. He didn't look up and didn't need to. 20 years of conversations had taught him exactly how to wound without direct eye contact. Community college has excellent programs for students with limited backgrounds. Destiny's fingers tightened around her acceptance letter from Howard University. Full scholarship, summa cum laude potential, everything she'd dreamed of. But dreams felt small in this kitchen, in this house where she'd learned that love came with conditions she could never meet. I got into Howard, she said quietly. Howard? Jake laughed, the sound ugly and familiar. Isn't that one of those? What do they call them? Historically black colleges? Makes sense, I guess. The silence that followed pressed against Destiny's chest like water. She'd been drowning in these silences for 16 years, ever since the Williamses had adopted her from foster care with such fanfare, such photographs for their Christmas cards, such stories to tell their country club friends about their charitable hearts. She remembered being 8 years old, believing she'd finally found her forever family. Remembered the first time Patricia had forgotten to invite her to Jake's birthday party photos. Remembered learning to make herself invisible during family gatherings, to shrink into corners while relatives praised the Williamses for their good deed, in stage whispers meant for her to hear. Howard is an excellent school, Destiny said, though her voice barely carried across the granite island that separated them like a moat. Of course it is, sweetheart, Patricia replied, already turning back to her laptop. You'll fit right in there. The dismissal stung because it was true. She would fit in there, among people who wouldn't measure her worth against their own reflected kindness. But at 22, Destiny had learned that fighting only made the rejection more explicit, more cruel. She escaped to her room, the smallest in the house, decorated in neutral tones that matched nothing and belonged to no one. Through her window, she could see the graduation party preparations beginning in the backyard. White tents, white chairs, white flowers. A celebration of Jake's achievement that would last until midnight, filled with friends and extended family who would congratulate the Williamses on raising such a successful son. Her own graduation was next month. Howard University, bachelor's in psychology, graduating summa cum laude. She'd already been accepted to their graduate program with a teaching assistantship that would cover her expenses. Independence, finally, after 22 years of conditional love and qualified acceptance. But tonight was Jake's night, and Destiny knew her role. Smile when spoken to, help serve if needed, disappear when the photographs began. 300 miles away, Vincent Cross stood in his penthouse office, staring at quarterly reports that should have made him happy. His tech consulting firm had just posted record profits, his investments were performing beyond projections, and at 35, he had everything his younger self had dreamed of acquiring. So why did success taste like ash? His assistant knocked, entering with the careful deference money commanded. "Mr. Cross? The car is ready for the Williams party. Should I confirm your attendance?" Vincent nodded, though attending yet another networking event felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Richard Williams had been courting his business for months, hosting elaborate dinners and sending expensive gifts. Tonight's graduation party for his son was another opportunity to strengthen their partnership, code for Vincent writing larger checks. He understood the game and had mastered it years ago when he'd climbed from foster care to Fortune 500 consulting. Smile at the right people, write the right checks, attend the right parties. Build the kind of life that looks perfect from the outside while feeling hollow within. His phone buzzed with a text from his last date, another model whose conversation never moved beyond surface pleasantries. Beautiful, appropriate, forgettable. Like everything else in his carefully constructed world. Vincent straightened his tie, grabbed his keys, and headed toward an evening he expected to endure rather than enjoy. He couldn't have known that across town, a young woman was preparing for the same party, carrying her own collection of rejections and small hopes. Neither could have predicted that by midnight, everything would change. The graduation party hummed with the kind of casual wealth that never announced itself. Conversations about summer homes in the Hamptons, children's internships at prestigious firms, charity galas where attendance mattered more than cause. Vincent moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and making small talk while his mind catalogued exit strategies. "Vincent, so glad you could make it." Richard Williams appeared with the aggressive friendliness of someone who needed something. "Come, let me introduce you to some people. Very influential in the tech sector." Vincent allowed himself to be guided through clusters of guests, each introduction blending into the next. He'd perfected the art of being present while remaining distant, of smiling while calculating exactly how long politeness required him to stay. The backyard had been transformed into an elegant celebration space. String lights created constellations overhead, while servers moved silently between guests carrying champagne and appetizers. Everything orchestrated, everything perfect, everything predictably hollow. He was considering his escape when a flash of movement caught his eye. Near the kitchen entrance, a young black woman emerged carrying a tray of glasses, moving with the careful invisibility of someone who'd learned to serve without being seen. She wore a simple navy dress that somehow looked both appropriate and separate from the evening's carefully curated elegance. What stopped Vincent wasn't her beauty, though she was beautiful in a way that seemed unconscious of itself, but the expression on her face. He recognized it with the sudden shock of seeing his own reflection unexpectedly. It was the look of someone who belonged nowhere, who had learned to exist in spaces that tolerated rather than welcomed them. She moved between guests who took glasses without acknowledgement, their conversations flowing around her as if she were furniture with the ability to walk. Vincent watched her navigate the careful choreography of invisibility, understanding with painful clarity exactly what he was witnessing. When she approached his group, Richard Williams barely glanced her way. "Destiny, we're running low on the champagne. Could you?" "Of course," she said quietly, her voice carrying a dignity that the dismissal couldn't touch. As she turned to leave, Vincent found himself speaking. "Excuse me." She stopped, surprise flickering across her features. Guests rarely addressed the help directly, and certainly not with courtesy. "I'm Vincent Cross." He extended his hand, noting how her eyes widened slightly at the name she clearly recognized. Destiny Williams, she replied, her handshake firm despite her obvious uncertainty. Williams? Vincent's eyebrows rose. Are you related to? Adopted daughter, Richard interjected quickly, his tone carrying a subtle warning. Destiny's been part of our family for many years. Very grateful for the opportunities we've provided. The words landed like physical blows, and Vincent watched Destiny's face carefully compose itself into neutrality. But her eyes held a flash of something that made his chest tighten with recognition and rage. Congratulations on your graduation, Vincent said directly to her, ignoring Richard's pointed look. What school? Howard University, she answered, lifting her chin slightly. Psychology major. Howard has an excellent psychology program, Vincent said, meaning it. What are your plans after graduation? For the first time, genuine warmth entered her expression. Graduate school. I want to work with children in foster care, help them navigate the system. How admirable! Patricia Williams appeared suddenly, her smile bright and empty. Destiny has always been very service-oriented. Perfect fit for social work, don't you think? The casual condescension in Patricia's tone, the implication that Destiny's ambitions were somehow lesser, more appropriate for someone of her background, hit Vincent like a physical assault. He'd heard similar conversations about himself in his early career, the barely concealed surprise when he exceeded expectations, the subtle suggestions that he should be grateful for opportunities others took as their due. Actually, Vincent said, his voice carrying a new edge, I think psychology is one of the most challenging and important fields. The understanding of human behavior, trauma recovery, systemic intervention, it requires exceptional intelligence and emotional strength. Destiny's eyes met him across the conversation, and something passed between them. Recognition, gratitude, a moment of being truly seen. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but Vincent felt something shift inside his chest, like a door long closed suddenly opening. Well, yes, of course, Patricia stumbled slightly. We're very proud of Destiny's achievements. The pause before achievements was surgical in its precision, designed to diminish while maintaining plausible innocence. Vincent watched Destiny absorb the cut, her composure never wavering even as something died a little behind her eyes. If you'll excuse me, Destiny said quietly, I should get that champagne. She turned to leave, and Vincent felt an inexplicable urge to follow, to continue the conversation, to somehow undo the casual cruelty he'd just witnessed. Instead, he watched her disappear into the kitchen, her dignity intact despite everything. Lovely girl, Richard said, his tone suggesting the conversation was closed. Now, about that partnership we discussed. But Vincent was no longer listening. His attention remained fixed on the kitchen door, his mind replaying those few moments of connection with someone who understood what it meant to be perpetually other, perpetually grateful for scraps of recognition in a world that saw your existence as charity. For the first time in months, Vincent Cross felt awake. He excused himself from the group and found himself walking toward the kitchen, drawn by something he couldn't name but desperately needed to understand. Vincent stopped just outside the kitchen door, his hand raised to knock before common sense reasserted itself. What was he doing? He barely knew this woman, and approaching her now would only create awkwardness for both of them. The rational part of his mind catalogued all the reasons to return to the party: business obligations, social expectations, the simple fact that pursuing a conversation with Richard Williams' adopted daughter could complicate potential partnerships. He let his hand fall, took a step back, then found himself frozen in place anyway. Through the partially open door he could hear movement, dishes being arranged, glasses clinking, the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to working alone. No conversation, no laughter from other staff. Just Destiny, handling the evening's logistics in isolation while the celebration continued outside. Vincent forced himself to turn away, rejoining the party with renewed focus on his original purpose. Business, networking, the careful cultivation of relationships that advanced his company's interests. He found Richard Williams near the bar, already 2 drinks into what looked like a long evening of self-congratulation. Vincent, There you are. I was just telling Senator Crawford about your innovative approach to data security. He's very interested in discussing a potential contract. Vincent slipped back into professional mode, shaking hands and exchanging business cards while his mind insisted on wandering to psychology programs and foster care work, and the way Destiny's eyes had lit up when discussing her plans. He caught himself scanning the crowd for glimpses of her, watching for that navy dress moving between guests who continued to treat her as furniture. In the kitchen, Destiny arranged champagne flutes with mechanical precision, grateful for the familiar rhythm of service. Work was simple, clear expectations, measurable results, no emotional landmines disguised as family conversations. She could disappear into tasks, let her mind drift to next month's graduation ceremony, to the moving day when she'd finally load her belongings into a rented truck and drive toward a future that belonged entirely to her. The encounter with Vincent Cross had shaken something loose inside her chest, a dangerous flutter of recognition she couldn't afford to indulge. Successful men didn't genuinely interest themselves in psychology majors from Howard, especially not psychology majors who served drinks at family parties. Whatever moment she'd imagined between them was projection, wishful thinking, the kind of fantasy that led to disappointment. She'd learned long ago not to mistake politeness for genuine interest, not to confuse professional courtesy with personal connection. Vincent Cross was everything the Williams family aspired to: wealthy, successful, influential. His brief kindness was probably automatic, the sort of noblesse oblige that came naturally to people who'd never questioned their place in the world. Destiny? Jake appeared in the doorway, swaying slightly. Mom wants you to start the next round of appetizers. And maybe, stay in here for a while. Some of Dad's business friends are here, and... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Destiny understood the unspoken message. Make yourself scarce while the important conversations happen. Don't remind the guests that the Williams family's charity case was present during business discussions. Of course, she said, turning back to her tasks. Jake lingered in the doorway, and for a moment, Destiny wondered if he might say something different. They'd been siblings for 16 years, had shared breakfasts and Christmas mornings and homework frustrations. Surely some part of him remembered when they'd been an actual family, before adolescence had taught him that kindness to her reflected poorly on his social standing. It's not personal, he said finally, his voice carrying a note she'd never heard before. It's just, tonight's important for Dad. Business stuff. Destiny nodded without turning around. It was the closest thing to an apology Jake had offered in years, and somehow that made it hurt worse. She preferred his casual cruelty to these moments when his basic humanity leaked through, reminding her of what they'd lost and could never recover. Vincent made it through 2 more business conversations before excusing himself to step outside. The evening air felt cool against his skin, a relief from the party's warm brightness. He found himself in the Williams side garden, away from the main celebration, where he could think without performing. His phone buzzed with messages, other parties to attend, calls to return, the endless demands of maintaining his carefully constructed life. 6 months ago, these obligations had felt important, purposeful. Tonight they felt like chains. He thought about Destiny's plans to work with foster children, the quiet passion in her voice when she described helping others navigate the system. When had he last felt that kind of purpose? When had his work become about acquisition rather than contribution? The questions made him uncomfortable, suggesting changes he wasn't ready to contemplate. Better to focus on business, on the practical realities of networking and partnership building. Better to return to the party and fulfill his obligations. But as he walked back toward the celebration, Vincent found himself hoping for another glimpse of her, another moment of that unexpected connection that had made him feel awake for the first time in months. Neither he nor Destiny was ready to acknowledge what was happening between them. Both had learned that hope was dangerous, that unexpected kindness usually carried hidden costs. Both had reasons to resist the pull of recognition and possibility. But resistance was becoming harder with each passing moment, and the evening was far from over. The crisis began with a champagne flute and ended with an emergency room visit. Destiny was carrying her third tray of the evening when Patricia Williams gestured dramatically during a story about their recent Napa Valley vacation. Her diamond bracelet caught the crystal rim of a glass, sending champagne cascading across Senator Crawford's wife's designer dress and shattering crystal across the patio stones. "Oh my goodness!" Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Destiny, how could you be so careless?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Every conversation stopped, every guest turned to witness the spectacle. Destiny stood frozen, tray in hand, watching 20 years of careful invisibility evaporate under the weight of public humiliation. I'm sorry," she began, though she hadn't caused the accident. "Don't just stand there," Richard hissed, his voice low but carrying. "Clean it up. And for God's sake, be more careful." Destiny knelt immediately, gathering crystal shards with shaking hands while conversations gradually resumed around her. The familiar burn of injustice rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. 1 month left. She could endure 1 more month. A piece of crystal sliced deep into her palm, and blood began flowing faster than she could stanch it. She pressed her other hand against the wound, but crimson drops scattered across the white patio stones like accusation marks. "You need medical attention." Vincent Cross's voice cut through her panic. He was suddenly beside her, his expensive jacket forgotten as he knelt on the ground. "That's deep. You'll need stitches." "I'm fine," Destiny said automatically, though blood was seeping between her fingers. "I just need to. You need a hospital." Vincent stood, offering her his hand. "I'll drive you." "That's not necessary," Patricia interjected quickly. "We can call an ambulance if it's really that serious." But Vincent was already helping Destiny to her feet, his hand steady under her elbow. "My car's faster. Emergency rooms can take hours, and she's losing blood." Destiny wanted to protest, to insist she could handle this alone like she'd handled everything else. But the cut was deeper than she'd thought, and the world was starting to feel slightly unsteady. "I need to get my purse," she said weakly. "I'll cover any medical expenses," Vincent replied, already guiding her toward the driveway. "Let's go." Vincent's Tesla moved silently through suburban streets toward the nearest hospital, classical music playing softly while Destiny pressed his monogrammed handkerchief against her bleeding palm. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic scent of her wound. "I'm sorry about your handkerchief," she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the party. "I'll replace it. Don't worry about it." Vincent glanced at her injured hand. "How's the bleeding?" "Slowing down, I think." She lifted the cloth carefully, wincing at the deep gash across her palm. "This is embarrassing. Getting hurt at a party, bleeding in your car." "You didn't get hurt," Vincent said firmly. "Someone else caused an accident and blamed you for it. There's a difference." The certainty in his voice surprised her. Most people would have accepted the narrative Patricia had constructed, careless help making a mess during an elegant party. But Vincent had seen what actually happened, and more importantly, he was willing to acknowledge it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing what really happened. For taking me to the hospital. You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." The words came out more intense than he'd intended, and Vincent felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I mean, it was the right thing to do." They fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less awkward, more weighted with things neither was ready to say. Destiny found herself stealing glances at his profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel with barely controlled tension. She wondered what had made him angry enough to abandon a networking opportunity for someone he barely knew. "Can I ask you something?" Vincent said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "Sure. How long have you lived with the Williams family?" Destiny considered her answer carefully. 16 years. Since I was 6. And it's always been. He paused, searching for the right words. "Like tonight?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was prepared to explore fully. Destiny could deflect, could maintain the fiction that the Williams family was generous and loving, that her position was gratitude rather than servitude. But something about Vincent's tone suggested he would recognize lies, and had perhaps lived with similar ones himself. "Not always," she said finally. "When I was younger, it felt more like family. But somewhere along the way, I became a different kind of project. The kind you display at charity events but keep separate from real life." Vincent nodded slowly, his expression grim. "I understand that feeling. Do you?" The question escaped before she could stop it, carrying more vulnerability than she'd intended. He parked the car and turned to face her fully. "Foster care until I was 17. Then a scholarship to Princeton, where I learned that academic achievement doesn't erase where you came from. Just makes people expect you to be grateful for the opportunity to prove yourself over and over again." Something shifted in the space between them, a recognition deeper than shared experience. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, but two people who understood the weight of carrying other people's expectations while fighting for space to be themselves. "We should get you inside," Vincent said softly, though neither of them moved to leave the car just yet. The emergency room at 11 p.m. was a symphony of controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, the steady beep of monitors, nurses moving with practiced efficiency between curtained alcoves. Destiny sat on an examination table while Dr. Martinez cleaned her wound, Vincent in a plastic chair nearby, both of them existing in the strange intimacy that medical emergencies create between strangers. "You're lucky," Dr. Martinez said, examining the cut under bright light. "Deep, but it missed the major tendons. 12 stitches should do it. I'll need to numb the area first." Destiny nodded, trying not to flinch as the needle approached. She'd always hated medical procedures, a leftover anxiety from childhood when doctors meant social workers and social workers meant the possibility of another placement falling through. "So," Vincent said, clearly trying to distract her from the procedure, psychology at Howard. "What made you choose that path?" "The social worker who handled my case when I was 5, Destiny replied, watching Dr. Martinez prepare the sutures. "Mrs. Johnson. She was the first person who ever made me feel like what I thought mattered, like my feelings were valid instead of inconvenient." "What happened when you were 5? The question hung in the antiseptic air. Destiny rarely talked about her early childhood, had learned that trauma stories made people uncomfortable, that most preferred the sanitized version where grateful children found loving homes and lived happily ever after. But something about Vincent's presence, the way he listened without judgment, the recognition in his eyes when she'd mentioned foster care, made honesty feel safer than usual. "My birth mother died of an overdose," she said quietly. "I was in the apartment with her for 3 days before neighbors called the police. I remember Mrs. Johnson explaining that it wasn't my fault, that sometimes grown-ups get sick in ways that make them unable to take care of children. She was the only person who didn't treat me like I was damaged or dangerous." Vincent's expression tightened with something that looked like pain. 3 days? Jesus. You were just a baby. 5-year-olds are resilient, Destiny said, echoing words she'd heard countless times from well-meaning adults. The Williams family came along the next year. They seemed perfect, big house, stable marriage, resources to give me opportunities. Everyone said I was lucky. But it didn't feel lucky. Not exactly. Destiny watched Dr. Martinez work, grateful for the lidocaine that made the stitching painless. At first, maybe. They had this beautiful nursery ready, with Disney princesses and stuffed animals. Patricia would take pictures of me playing with toys, send them to their friends with captions about how happy I was. I thought I was happy. What changed? I did. I got older, started having opinions, started needing more than photo opportunities. Destiny's voice carried the weight of years spent analyzing her own experience. The Williams family wanted a grateful child who would reflect well on their generosity. But I had nightmares about my birth mother, asked uncomfortable questions about why she died, and got angry sometimes instead of being perpetually thankful. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his knee. "What kind of questions?" Why did she choose drugs over me? Whether she loved me at all. Whether love was real or just something people said when they wanted you to behave. Destiny looked up from her bandaged hand. The kind of questions that make adoptive parents panic because they don't have good answers. There aren't good answers, Vincent said. I asked similar questions for years. About your parents? My mother left when I was 4. Just gone one morning, with a note about needing to find herself. My father tried for a while, but addiction took him too. Different drug, same result. Vincent's voice was carefully controlled, but Destiny could hear the old wounds underneath. Foster care taught me that asking why people leave only guarantees they'll leave faster. Dr. Martinez finished the last stitch and began wrapping Destiny's hand in clean gauze. Keep this dry for 48 hours, she instructed. Come back in 10 days to have the stitches removed. Any signs of infection, redness, warmth, pus, come back immediately. They thanked her and made their way back through the hospital corridors, both lost in thoughts neither was quite ready to voice. The shared confession had created new gravity between them, a weight that felt both frightening and inevitable. Can I ask you something? Destiny said as they reached Vincent's car. After what we just shared, I think we're past asking permission. Why did you really leave the party tonight? I mean, those were important business contacts. Richard Williams has been courting your company for months. Vincent stopped with his hand on the car door, considering his answer. Because watching them treat you like property made me sick. Because I recognized something in your face that I'd spent years seeing in mirrors. Because, he paused, looking directly at her. Because for the first time in years, I met someone who understood what it felt like to be grateful for scraps while starving for something real. The honesty hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Destiny felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of defenses she'd maintained so carefully for so long. What are we doing? She asked softly. I don't know, Vincent admitted. But I know I don't want tonight to end with me driving you back to that house and pretending this conversation never happened. The party's probably still going. People will notice if we're both gone too long. Let them notice. Vincent's voice carried new resolve. I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people expect. Looking back, when have you found unexpected understanding with someone who truly saw your story? They didn't return to the party. Instead, Vincent drove to an all-night diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where fluorescent lights buzzing over vinyl booths and coffee refills came without asking. At 1 a.m., they were among the few customers, a truck driver reading a paperback novel, a nurse finishing her shift, an elderly man nursing coffee and crossword puzzles. This feels like a different world, Destiny said, sliding into a booth by the window. Her bandaged hand rested carefully on the scratched Formica table. 4 hours ago, I was serving champagne to senators. Now I'm in a diner at 1 in the morning with someone who understands why champagne and senators can feel like performance art. Vincent finished, settling across from her. God, when was the last time I sat in a place like this? Probably college. The waitress approached with practiced efficiency. Coffee. Please, they both said simultaneously, then laughed at the synchronicity. Pie, the waitress continued. We've got apples, cherries, and chocolate cream. Apple, Destiny said. With ice cream. Make that 2, Vincent added, surprising himself. When had he last eaten pie? His usual diet consisted of protein bars between meetings and catered meals at business functions. When the waitress left, they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their earlier confessions settling between them like a shared secret. Outside, the occasional car passed on the empty highway, headlights creating temporary constellations in the darkness. So, Vincent said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug, psychology graduate school. Tell me about that. What's your research focus? Destiny's face lit up, and Vincent realized he'd never seen her look purely happy before. Attachment theory in children who've experienced multiple placements. I want to understand how kids develop resilience, how they learn to trust again after betrayal. The research could help improve matching processes, training for foster families. You want to fix the system that failed you. I want to understand it first, Destiny corrected. You can't fix something you don't fully comprehend. Too many well-meaning people make changes based on assumptions rather than evidence. Vincent nodded, struck by her analytical approach to personal pain. That takes incredible strength. Most people would want to forget, move on. Moving on without understanding just means repeating patterns, Destiny said, cutting into her pie. I've seen it happen. Foster kids who age out of the system and immediately seek out relationships that recreate familiar dysfunction because chaos feels like home. Is that what happened with the Williams family? Familiar dysfunction? Destiny considered the question, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. Not dysfunction exactly. More like emotional withholding disguised as structure. They provided everything required: food, shelter, education, medical care. But love came with conditions I could never consistently meet. What kind of conditions? Gratitude. Constant, overwhelming gratitude. Never complaining, never asking for more, never expressing needs that weren't convenient. Being the perfect success story they could showcase to friends. Destiny's voice held no bitterness, just clinical observation. The problem was, I was still a child with a child's needs for unconditional acceptance. They wanted a grateful refugee, not a daughter. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. I know that feeling. Different circumstances, same emotional landscape. Tell me. Princeton was full of legacy students whose parents had paved their paths with donations and connections. I was there on academic merit alone, working 20 hours a week in the dining hall to cover expenses. Professors loved having a success story in their classes, the kid who'd overcome adversity through hard work and determination. But you were still just trying to belong. Exactly. And belonging meant never letting them see how exhausting it was to be grateful all the time. Never admitting that sometimes I was angry about having to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Never showing how lonely it felt to be the inspiration instead of just a person. They ate in thoughtful silence, both lost in memories of performing gratitude while starving for authentic connection. The diner's warmth felt cocooning after the staged perfection of the Williams party. Can I tell you something ridiculous? Destiny said suddenly. Please do. This is the first time in years I've had a conversation where I didn't feel like I was auditioning for approval. She laughed, but there was wonder in her voice. I keep waiting for you to check your watch or change the subject when I talk about difficult things. Vincent smiled, and Destiny realized it was the first completely genuine expression she'd seen from him all evening. I keep waiting for you to ask me for something. Money, connections, business opportunities. Nobody talks to me anymore without wanting something. What do you want? Destiny asked impulsively. The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither had expected to consider. Vincent looked at her across the table, bandaged hand resting on formica, navy dress slightly wrinkled from the evening's events, eyes bright with intelligence and unexpected trust, and felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Honestly, I want to keep talking to you. Tomorrow, next week, next month. I want to hear about your research, your graduate school experience, your plans for changing the world one foster kid at a time. He paused, vulnerability creeping into his voice. I want to remember what it feels like to connect with someone who sees the person instead of the portfolio. That sounds dangerous, Destiny said softly. Terrifying, Vincent agreed. But I'm tired of being safe. Outside, dawn was beginning to touch the horizon, painting the sky in shades of possibility neither had dared imagine when the evening began. The call came at 7 a.m., just as Destiny was unlocking the front door of the Williams house, still wearing her wrinkled navy dress from the night before. Vincent's business card was tucked safely in her purse alongside his promise to call later that day, and for the first time in years, she felt something that resembled hope blooming in her chest. Where the hell have you been? Richard Williams stood in the foyer, his face flushed with rage. Behind him, Patricia clutched her silk robe, her expression a mixture of fury and calculated hurt. I went to the emergency room, Destiny said carefully, raising her bandaged hand as evidence. Vincent Cross was kind enough to drive me. Vincent Cross. Richard's voice dripped with venom. Do you have any idea what you've done? Destiny's stomach began to sink, though she couldn't yet identify the threat. What do you mean? Senator Crawford's wife called 3 hours ago, Patricia said, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. Apparently, word has gotten out that our adopted daughter was seen having an intimate late-night dinner with one of the city's most eligible bachelors. The implication being that we somehow arranged this introduction for our own benefit. That's not what happened, Destiny protested. I was injured. He took me to the hospital. We had coffee afterward. To what? Richard interrupted. To discuss your tragic backstory? To play the poor little foster child card? Do you understand that Vincent Cross represents a $50 million partnership opportunity for my firm? The words hit Destiny like physical blows. You think I was manipulating him? I think you've been in this family long enough to understand how the world works, Patricia said coldly. Successful men don't take random interest in help unless they're being influenced. What did you tell him, Destiny? What sob story did you spin to get his attention? I didn't tell him anything that wasn't true, Destiny said, though her voice was beginning to shake. We talked about college, about psychology, about your poor dead mother, about how cruel we've been to you. Richard's voice rose to a shout. Jesus Christ, Destiny, we've given you everything. A home, an education, opportunities most kids in your situation never get. And this is how you repay us? By sabotaging my business relationships with your victim narrative. I wasn't trying to sabotage anything. Destiny's composure finally cracked. I was bleeding. He offered to help. We talked like normal people. I'm sorry if that threatens your business deal, but I didn't do anything wrong. Nothing wrong. Patricia laughed, but the sound held no humor. You disappeared from a family event with one of our most important guests. You spent the night God knows where, doing God knows what. And now his assistant has called to cancel the Monday meeting Richard has been planning for months. The final piece clicked into place, and Destiny felt her world tilt off its axis. He canceled the meeting? This morning, Richard confirmed, his voice brutal with satisfaction. Apparently, Mr. Cross needs to reevaluate his partnership priorities. I wonder what could have caused such a sudden change of heart. Destiny's mind raced, trying to process the implications. Vincent had seemed genuine, had shared his own painful history, had looked at her with something that felt like real interest. But successful men didn't walk away from lucrative business deals for people they'd just met. Unless everything she'd believed about their connection was projection and wishful thinking. Unless his kindness had been politeness, his interest had been pity, and his stories about understanding her experience had been manipulation designed to extract information he could use. I need to call him, Destiny said weakly. There's been a misunderstanding. No, Patricia said firmly. You've done enough damage. You're going to pack your things and leave this house today. We've tolerated your ingratitude long enough, but we won't let you destroy Richard's career with your selfish desperation. Leave. Destiny's voice came out as a whisper. But graduation is in 3 weeks. My things, my documents, will be forwarded to whatever address you provide, Richard said coldly. You're 22 years old, Destiny. Legally, we have no obligation to house you anymore. We've been generous enough as it is. The dismissal was final, absolute. Destiny stood in the foyer where she'd lived for 16 years, surrounded by family photos that had never included her, furniture she'd dusted but never been invited to enjoy, watching the only stability she'd ever known crumble around her feet. I trusted him, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. And that, Patricia replied with surgical precision, is exactly why you'll never rise above where you came from. You mistake charity for care, politeness for interest. You're so desperate for love that you'll believe any kind gesture means something more than it does. The cruelty of the assessment landed with devastating accuracy. Standing there in her wrinkled dress, clutching Vincent's business card like a talisman against rejection, Destiny saw herself through the Williams family's eyes. Pathetic, grasping, naive enough to believe that a successful man could genuinely care about a foster kid from nowhere. "You have 4 hours," Richard said, turning away. "After that, we're changing the locks." Destiny climbed the stairs to her small room for the last time, her bandaged hand throbbing with each step. Through her window, she could see the party cleanup beginning in the backyard. White chairs being folded, string lights being taken down, all evidence of celebration disappearing, as if the evening had never happened. Just like her connection with Vincent. Just like every hope she'd ever been foolish enough to harbor. She was alone again, and maybe that's all she'd ever been meant to be. Vincent stared at his phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, Destiny's number glowing on the screen like an accusation. He'd been trying to call her since 9 a.m., when his assistant had delivered the message that would change everything. Richard Williams was threatening to expose irregularities in Vincent's business practices unless he honored their original partnership agreement. The threat was baseless but dangerous. Williams had enough political connections to make Vincent's life complicated, enough influence to plant seeds of doubt about his company's integrity. One whispered suggestion at the right cocktail party could damage relationships Vincent had spent years building. His lawyer had been blunt. Distance yourself from whatever caused this. Williams is playing hardball, and he clearly believes you've given him leverage. Fix it, or prepare for a very expensive legal battle. Vincent knew exactly what had caused Richard Williams' fury. Their late-night conversation at the diner had been reported back to the Williams family, probably by some well-meaning party guest who'd seen them leave together. Now Destiny was being blamed for his canceled partnership, and Vincent was caught between protecting his business and protecting. What? A woman he'd known for less than 12 hours? The rational choice was obvious. Apologize to Williams, explain that his interest in Destiny had been momentary charity, restore the business relationship, and move forward with his carefully constructed life. One night of connection wasn't worth destroying everything he'd built. But every time Vincent tried to draft that apology email, he heard Destiny's voice describing her research plans, saw her face light up when talking about helping foster children, and remembered the way she'd looked at him when he'd shared his own painful history. For the first time in years, he'd felt seen rather than courted, understood rather than managed. His phone buzzed with another message from his business partner. "Williams is serious about this. We can't afford to lose the other contracts he influences. Fix this today." Vincent set the phone aside and walked to his penthouse windows, looking down at the city where, somewhere, Destiny was probably trying to understand why he'd suddenly disappeared from her life. He imagined her confusion, her hurt, the way his silence must confirm every fear she'd ever harbored about trusting people who seemed too good to be true. Destiny sat in her rented Honda Civic in the parking lot of a budget motel, everything she owned packed into 3 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. The Williams family had been efficient in their exile, her belongings waiting on the front porch when she'd returned from a fruitless morning of apartment hunting, the locks already changed, no forwarding address needed because no one would be sending mail. Vincent's business card lay on the passenger seat, crumpled from the number of times she'd picked it up and put it down again. She'd tried calling twice, getting voicemail both times, and the silence told her everything she needed to know about their connection's authenticity. Patricia Williams had been right. Destiny had mistaken politeness for interest, charity for care. Whatever business deal Vincent had been pursuing with Richard Williams was clearly more important than one evening's conversation with the help. The motel room was clean but depressing, beige walls, industrial carpet, the lingering smell of disinfectant and other people's disappointments. Destiny sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the physical evidence of her life. Textbooks for classes she'd already completed, acceptance letters for graduate school, photographs from college that showed her smiling with friends who'd graduated and moved on to their own futures. Her phone rang, and for a moment her heart leaped. But the caller ID showed Howard Financial Aid, not the number she'd been hoping to see. "Miss Williams? This is Janet from the Financial Aid office. I'm calling about your graduate assistantship. Is there a problem?" Destiny asked, though she already knew there would be. Good news never came through phone calls to budget motel rooms. We've received some concerning information about your current housing situation. As you know, the assistantship requires a permanent address for tax purposes, and we understand you may be experiencing housing instability. Destiny closed her eyes. The Williams family's reach extended further than she'd realized. I'm in the process of securing new housing, she said carefully. I understand, but we need documentation by Friday or we'll have to reassign the position. University policy requires all graduate assistants to demonstrate stable housing arrangements. Friday was 4 days away. Destiny had enough savings for maybe 2 weeks at the motel, and apartment applications required credit references she didn't have, employment verification from people who'd just expelled her from their lives, deposits she couldn't afford. I'll have the documentation ready, she said, though she had no idea how. After hanging up, Destiny lay back on the scratchy bedspread and stared at the ceiling. 22 years old, homeless, abandoned by the only family she'd known, watching her graduate school dreams crumble because she'd been naive enough to believe in one evening's kindness. Vincent's decision came suddenly, crystallizing as he read William's final ultimatum. Apologize publicly for your inappropriate conduct with our daughter, confirm your commitment to our business partnership, and this unfortunate misunderstanding will be forgotten. The email's language made him sick. Inappropriate conduct with our daughter, as if Destiny were property rather than a person, as if their conversation had been predatory rather than the most genuine connection he'd experienced in years. He thought about his younger self, desperate for approval, willing to endure humiliation for the promise of belonging. He thought about Destiny, probably sitting somewhere right now, believing that her trust had been misplaced again, that her instincts about connection were fundamentally flawed. Vincent deleted William's email without responding. Instead, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. Some things were worth more than business partnerships. Some people were worth the risk of losing everything else. It took 3 tries to get the right motel, but Vincent finally spotted her Honda in the parking lot of the Riverside just as the sun was beginning to set. Destiny heard the knock and assumed it was the motel manager asking about extended stay rates. She opened the door without checking the peephole, then froze when she saw Vincent standing in the fluorescent hallway light, his expensive suit incongruous against the budget motel's worn carpeting. "Before you close the door," he said quickly, "I need you to know that everything that happened between us was real. Everything I told you, everything you told me, it mattered. It changed something in me that I didn't even know was broken." Destiny gripped the doorframe, her bandaged hand aching. "Richard Williams canceled your meeting because of me. I know what that must have cost you." "He didn't just cancel the meeting," Vincent said, stepping closer. "He threatened to destroy my business unless I publicly apologized for my inappropriate conduct with you and committed to a partnership that would essentially make me his business subsidiary. So you're here to apologize." Destiny's voice was flat, resigned. "To explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that you were just being polite to help. I'm here to tell you that I chose you." The words hung in the humid evening air. Destiny stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "I walked away from a $50 million partnership," Vincent continued, "because the idea of apologizing for caring about you, of pretending that our connection was inappropriate or predatory or somehow wrong, made me physically sick. I've spent my entire adult life building a business, accumulating wealth, and collecting the kind of success that's supposed to make up for growing up unwanted. But none of it ever made me feel the way I felt sitting in that diner with you at 3 in the morning. Vincent." Destiny's voice broke on his name. "They kicked you out, didn't they? The Williams family." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Because of me. Because I couldn't leave well enough alone, couldn't just take you to the hospital and drive away like a normal person would have." Vincent's jaw tightened with anger, not at her, but at the situation, at the people who'd punished her for his choices. "Where are you staying?" "Here. For now. Until I can find something more permanent." Destiny gestured at the motel room behind her. "Graduate school might not work out. They need housing documentation by Friday, and I don't have references or deposits or move in with me. The words escaped before Vincent could think them through, but once they were out, he realized he meant them completely. What? Move in with me. I have a penthouse with 3 bedrooms, more space than one person needs. You can stay as long as you want, through graduate school, through your doctorate, through whatever comes next. No conditions, no expectations, just a place to be safe while you build the life you want. Destiny shook her head slowly. I can't accept charity. I won't be someone's project or conscience-clearing exercise. It's not charity, Vincent said firmly. It's a partnership. You help me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond profit margins, and I provide stable housing while you change the world one foster kid at a time. We both get something we need. People will talk. They'll say I'm using you, that you're. Let them talk. I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think. Vincent stepped closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Destiny, in one evening, you made me feel more alive than I've felt in years. More connected, more purposeful, more like myself than I remember being since college. If that's not worth a business partnership with people who think you're property, then I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics. Tears had started flowing down Destiny's cheeks, and she wiped them away with her unbandaged hand. This is crazy. We barely know each other. We know enough. We know what it feels like to be unwanted, to perform gratitude while starving for authentic connection. We know what it's like to be underestimated and overlooked and expected to be grateful for scraps. Vincent's voice softened. We know what it feels like to find someone who sees the person instead of the story. What if it doesn't work? What if we're just 2 damaged people projecting connection onto circumstance? Then we'll figure it out together. But Destiny, what if it does work? What if this is the beginning of something neither of us expected but both of us need? Destiny looked past him to where his Tesla sat in the motel parking lot, then back at the small room where she'd been preparing to rebuild her life from nothing. The choice felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. I graduate in 3 weeks, she said finally. I'll be there. Front row, if you'll let me. Graduate school is demanding. I'll be studying constantly, working with difficult cases, probably not very good company some evenings. I travel frequently for business. I work late, take calls at odd hours, and probably snore. Vincent smiled, and Destiny felt something ease in her chest. We'll be imperfect together. She thought about the conversation at the diner, the way he'd listened without judgment, the recognition that had passed between them like a shared language. She thought about Patricia Williams' cruel words about mistaking charity for care, about her own history of misplaced trust and disappointed hopes. But she also thought about Vincent walking away from $50 million, about him standing in a budget motel parking lot offering her partnership instead of pity, about the way he'd said her name like it mattered. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll move in with you. Temporarily. Until I figure out what comes next. Vincent's smile transformed his entire face, and Destiny realized she was smiling back despite everything, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite years of learning not to trust in unexpected kindness. 3 months later, at Destiny's graduate school orientation, Vincent sat in the campus coffee shop watching her animated conversation with fellow psychology students. She was discussing her research proposal on attachment theory, her face bright with passion and purpose, completely in her element. You know, she'd said the night before, I used to think love was something you had to earn through perfect behavior and constant gratitude. But maybe real love is just choosing each other, again and again, even when it's complicated. Vincent had kissed her then, tasting the truth of those words, grateful beyond measure for the evening, when a shattered champagne glass had led them both towards something neither had dared to hope for. What unexpected moment in your life led you to discover that love, real love, was different than you'd imagined?